Here are some more women who inspire me. From Alice LaCour of the Prosecutors podcast, who, despite her humility, is one of the most brilliant legal minds of our day, to Cain, a business journalist who transformed her life and her career to tackle some of the most perplexing true crime stories with integrity and ethics on the Murder Sheet podcast. There's Julia Cowley, a forensic scientist turned FBI profiler and the host of the podcast The Consult, and Allison, Dickson, an intellectual force of nature, and Shiloh, a former police officer turned forensic psychologist. These are role models for little girls around the world and role models for you and me, regardless of what you are.
It really heartens me for the future. A bunch of people will just be naysayers and say, we don't talk to each other anymore. And that might be the case, but I see so many pockets where there is honest dialogue in everything. I'm not just talking about true crime. I'm talking about life. It's within your own family. It's with your significant other. It's with your friends. It's with your kids. It's with people you've never met on the internet. We are all human. We are all, in this life together, and we get this one life, and it matters, and every moment matters, and we can choose to kind of take away from it or add to it. And I hope that the time that people choose to listen to our podcast is adding to it, and that we're talking about something so much more than just true crime. It goes far beyond that. It goes back to the very humanity of each person and the dignity of each person and our ability to communicate with other humans in our life.
Because I really do think there's something to the fact that this went unsolved for so long. People have been looking for scapegoats, and they found many different scapegoats. And even now that someone has been arrested and charged with a crime, there's continuing to be this effort to scapegoat. And I think that is deeply unhelpful and says more about the people doing it than any reality to the situation. And I think people just need to try to come to terms with the reality versus necessarily what sounds good on the internet.
So for me, and maybe it just hasn't hit me yet, I feel like I was very good at compartmentalizing. And I'm a very empathetic and sympathetic person. But when I was doing the work as a profiler, part of it is you're detached from it. You're not out there at the crime scenes day to day, talking to victims' families. I think that stuff can really weigh on the detectives. So there is a bit of distance involved, but I just found the work so fascinating, so interesting.
King himself says that fiction is truth wrapped in a lie. And, that to me is the most interesting way to kind of process a lot of those difficult truths that are out there. I have a very similar experience with my book Strings, which was the first novel that I had published by, it was published by a small press, very small press. But it was my first actual like novel publication. And that book is unlike anything I've ever written because of its nihilism. That word strikes a chord with me because I tend to avoid that myself. In my work, I always try to put a little glimmer of hope in there. And Pet Cemetery, I think I might have been on some subconscious level channeling that because I've read that book about 20 times, maybe more. And especially throughout my teenage years, just trying to understand grief and grapple with it because I had never lost anybody close to me before. And I still have been very lucky that way. I still have both my parents, I still have my brother, I still have uh, you know, all my kids, my husband, everybody close to me. And I haven't experienced that level of grief that is expressed in Pet Cemetery. And I think I was trying to expose myself to it in some way, like open myself up to it.
We don't know what their biological markers are, so it's very similar to like Dr. James Fallon, who is the neuropsychologist who kind of discovered all of this, in that he found out that he also had the brain and genetic markers of a psychopath himself. But he said, I can look back on the times in my life where I have done really dangerous things for the thrill of it. He goes, but I had a wonderful, loving family and childhood. So I have two of those prongs that are totally out of my control, but one of those prongs actually went the other way for me. So he's like, I get flavors of it, of sort of psychopathy. So again, I think it comes back to the genetic markers. Maybe this detective and this offender could have maybe some really traumatic backgrounds, but is there cross wiring in the detective's brain like there is in this offenders that we're saying is a psychopath, to where parts aren't lighting up appropriately in certain situations? So I think we have to stick with those three markers and kind of look at comparing those when we compare people's stories.